We start with the last part for today, for this conference, and it's my pleasure and my honor to welcome here partners from industry, and I guess this will be a nice contrast to the whole day program so far. We heard more the academic perspective, and now we're going to go more to the industry side and going to learn a little bit about their view on net neutrality. And we asked the panelists first to give a statement in the first round, each of you, and I'm going to present and introduce all the panelists in a short CV, and then we start after that a discussion. And I hope the audience gives us enough questions. I have, of course, prepared some questions, but it's more vivid if you come on with your questions and you can control more where we go within our discussion later on. So let me start on the right-hand side and introduce quickly Mr. Dr. Nikolaus Lindner. He's from eBay and belongs to those who are the service providers in the internet. And Dr. Lindner is the head of government relation in Germany at eBay. He joined eBay in 2007. Before that, Lindner worked as a manager government relation for the Association of Private Broadcasters, and Lindner graduated from the law faculty of the Free University in Berlin in 2001, followed by the Masters of Law in Innovation, Technology and the Law at the University in Edinburgh. And he obtained his PhD later from Freie University in Berlin, where he came back in the field of media regulation. And this is exactly the topic which brings him here today. During his legal clerkship, he was inter alia with a law firm specialized in media law and with the lobbying office of Bertelsmann in Brussels. During his studies, Lindner worked as a journalist for ZDF, the second channel in Germany. So maybe you start with the first short statement of, let's say, 5 minutes, 7 minutes.
Thanks a lot, and thank you very much for the opportunity to also present our opinion, our view on net neutrality. Let me start with just going one step back and let's ask ourselves, what's the internet, or what's the positive thing about the internet? The internet is a unique democratic and social tool that enhances access to information and freedom of speech. For consumers, it offers unparalleled choice of products and services, and for the business world, it enables productivity and efficiency gains through continued innovation and investment. And why is this the case? We think because the internet was and is open because of the neutrality of the net. It's governed by the principle of openness and non-discrimination. This approach has been integral to making the internet the home of the most innovative and exciting new businesses and ideas. Skype, Facebook, Google, eBay. Great ideas from individuals were able to reach every internet user, convince them, and be successful. This innovative environment is in danger if services are blocked or if there has to be paid an extra fee, as we have seen it and still see it with Skype. Every service has to be able to reach every user, also the data-intensive services. And every user has to be able to access and receive any lawful information. This must not be dependent on the goodwill of telecommunication provider. And when I say every user has to be able to access and receive information, it means that the user also has to be able to use the service so with a speed that makes sense. It doesn't make sense if a user just have access to a service but can't really use it because the data transfer is too slow for this particular service. The innovative internet, as we know it, is at risk if private networks will force out and discriminate against content and service providers that refuse to pay new tolls or extra fees. And why do I say extra fees here? Because nobody is using the internet for free. Consumers are paying for access, companies are paying also for data transfer and are building up infrastructure too. Furthermore, internet companies have spent billions on new content and services that have transformed people's life. Content and services are what drive broadband internet access adoption. Consumers who subscribe to broadband do so in order to be able to use the services and to get access to interesting and information-rich content. and not because they want to collect fiber. Let me finish with some thoughts on the buzzword network management. An open internet does not exclude meaningful network management. If a service, for example, like email or a software download is not time critical, why shouldn't a time critical one be delivered faster? But network management must not introduce a two-tier internet through the back door. Therefore, all network management must be done in a transparent, especially for the consumer, transparent and non-discriminatory way. We think that network management has to be controlled and that the rules should be established by lawmakers and not by the telecommunication providers. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that perspective. And now we go to the side of those who provide access to the internet, namely 1&1 Internet AG. This is Dr. Wolf Austhaus, who is a colleague of mine in the Enquete Commission in Deutsche Bundestag for Internet of Digital Society. He's head of political and regulatory affairs of 1&1 Internet, one of Germany's leading internet companies offering both access services, fixed and mobile, and wide range of applications around web hosting, cloud computing, personal communication. Wolf has brought practical experience in internet and telecommunication regulation from positions held at eBay as a legislative counsel for Europe and at German Industry Association of the IT, telecommunication and new media sector, Bitkom. Prior to these jobs, Wolf worked in several research projects on international law and internet regulation. He is still active in the academic sphere as visiting lecturer on internet and media law at the University of Göttingen. So now we're interested in your view.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Before I really start to explain what my view on my take on net neutrality is, I would like to describe what my perspectives are I want to take. And the one is indeed the one as a strong competitor in the market for telecommunications, so for internet access, because we are, together with Vodafone, I would say, the second largest DSL provider behind Deutsche Telekom. But we also, and Dr. Weinhard, Professor Weinhard already mentioned it, a provider of very innovative applications. So, you know, certainly web.de or GMX, all these mail services, we are probably the world largest hosting provider. So we also come from that perspective. All of that, in our products, we are focused very much on consumers, on private end users or small businesses. So we are very much user-focused in our view on things, and that is the other thing I want to bring into this debate, because in all the debate, what I missed today was the user speaking up, what his interests are and how we can protect these interests. So what is the issue at the moment if we discuss net neutrality? So there's no doubt that there's an enormous growth of data volume in the internet. Yes. I think there's also no doubt that there's an enormous growth of capacity in the internet. So we had predictions that the internet will be dead in 5 years, already in 2002 or 5, and again, and still up and running. So what we see is that investments work quite well. Network equipment becomes cheaper and cheaper every year. So it's not that difficult for the moment to keep a running internet. There are new services coming up that are more quality and time sensitive than the ones we saw before. So that is probably what we discuss here. But when we now dig a bit more deeply into the technological aspects, we will see that this is not a general thing of the internet is too slow or there's congestion in the internet, but we have to look where the congestion indeed happens. And I'm not a I'm a lawyer, so it's always difficult to speak about economics and technology and other things as a lawyer, but again, we always presume that we can do that. But what I hear from engineers is that the backbone is not the problem. So there's no real congestion there. Access is a problem, but only in certain regards, because it's only a problem there where we have shared resources. That is true for the aggregation networks, for the backhaul. It's no longer true usually for the last mile in the fixed network. And it's still true with capacity problems in all wireless areas, because there is a shared resource and we can't change that technologically. So if we now come to what really the net neutrality debate is about, I first see lots of agreement, because I think everyone will agree in this room that there should be no right of internet service providers to block specific content because it's unwanted, because of its content. Not the service, but because there's an opinion that is not acceptable for someone. So I think no internet service providers want to do that. I think there's also, probably at least in this room, agreement that network management is necessary, and it already happens today. So all we discuss about is how network management should occur, according to which criteria. And here the problem starts. Because we could distinguish according to the need for network management. That is, according to the type of service, whether it's time sensitive, whether it's quality sensitive. That makes a lot of sense. Or we could distinguish according to the service provider, the origin, the source from where it comes, whether it pays for being transported or not, for getting better quality or not. And here the problem is how this could impact the markets we discuss at the moment. And what we have to see is there are two markets. We have the market for transport, and we have the market for content. At the moment, the good thing about the internet and why it works so well for innovation, for really useful services, is that there's a direct link between the demanding part, that is the user, and the service provider. There's at the moment, the transport is not between the demanding user and the content, because there's no need to pay for that transportation. And that could be changed, creating indeed a vertical situation where we have the content, we have the transport who has to be paid, and then the user comes last. That could indeed create enormous risks that we already heard about for innovation, that it will in the end lead to the fact that larger companies can afford to pay for better quality, will get an advantage in competition by that, and therefore in the end probably only the larger one remains in competition in the market for content and services. There's a specific problem about vertically integrated providers like Deutsche Telekom, where indeed there's a larger incentive to discriminate competitors. To leave that alone, in the end we have the economic danger that was already mentioned, that we have less innovation, less competition in the content market. But that's not all. Because what we always also will see is that it's relatively difficult to cash in from the service providers, because, as I said, the problem, the investment, the need for investment is on the side of the access of the user, of the end user. There is the congestion problem. If now the money comes from the other side, you have to find ways to really have the flow of money from the content provider by an interconnection regime comparable to today's voice telecommunication, ending up by the one who should invest into better end user access. I don't know how that should happen, so I would guess that it's largely a theoretical problem we discuss here, but it might happen someday. But if it happens, then it will happen in a way that we will have much stronger players, bigger players, who can do these interconnection agreements. Probably it's only Deutsche Telekom for Germany. So we'll have few tier 1 players dealing these things between each other. Probably they won't give much money to the access providers afterwards, together with the content they transport to them. So the money stays with the ones providing the backbone, but not with the ones providing the access services, where the real investment problem is. And therefore I'm very doubtful whether the introduction of such a regime where the content provider pays could indeed solve the much discussed broadband problem. It's probably much better to have network management, to have prioritization, but to have the end user deciding what he wants. There's probably a market for online gamers to decide whether they want to get better ping times. And paying for that. So there's a market for that. And we should really allow that and drive by that the competition in the broadband market. But the other thing has all these harmful consequences I just described. So what do we need to do? Yes, we need more transparency, and we heard today that this could be something that at least helps to minimize the problem. We need at least the possibility to introduce minimum quality minimum requirements for services, which is already in the telco package. And I think the last thing is, what could happen is indeed, as I said, the emergence of such a vertical situation where we have the original product, that is the content, someone who brings it to the consumer and the end user. And there's for me, a very simple analogy, and that is to retail trade, where we have manufacturers, we have retail traders, and then the consumer on the other side. And for example, for that, we have indeed vertical restraint agreements, regulations on the EU level. And we should look into these regulations to see what we can learn from that, where it's not depending from market power, but just because of this vertical ladder, that additional regulation is introduced. And that, I think, is something we should consider.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Yeah, let me then come to our panelist from Deutsche Telekom, who is representing the main network carrier in Germany, not only in Germany. Dr. Jan Krancke. He's Vice President Regulatory Strategy and Economics at Deutsche Telekom headquarters in Bonn. He is responsible for regulatory strategy development and economic principles, as well as for its group-wide implementation. Before that, he was Vice President Regulatory Economics at T-Mobile International. Furthermore, Jan was until recently Vice Chair of the GSMA Europe. He is an economist by education and holds a doctoral degree from Kiel Institute of World Economics in Germany. We are interested in your statement.
Yeah, thank you very much from my side as well. Thanks for organizing this conference. What I think is a very useful event to bring everybody together from different perspectives, companies as well as scientists. And I think very, very well in time. If I remember the timing when first thoughts of setting up the conference, a lot of people said, well, it's not really worth discussing the issue. And now I think it's one of the mostly and hot debated issues. One point which I would like to highlight, it came up in some presentations, is really the difference between United States and Europe. We see net neutrality as one discussion which has emerged in the United States, and the competitive situation in the United States is completely different to what we see in Europe, and the legal framework in the United States is as well different compared to Europe. So every discussion we have in Europe surrounding net neutrality has to be mirrored against these differences. This is not to say that all what is discussed in America is not applicable in Europe, but at least some modifications are needed in the context of the competitive situation we have here. One interesting point, what I realized the whole day today, well, I missed the first two sessions, to be honest, but as far as I heard the rest, we never really had a discussion surrounding what does net neutrality exactly mean. So what's the definition of it? Because everybody knows we have several different opinions on what net neutrality means, and of course the consequences in saying I support net neutrality or net neutrality is good or bad extremely depends on the definition you give to net neutrality. So I assume we will discuss the issue further on this panel. The most important points, what I think should be discussed from a company perspective, is especially what are the impacts on innovation and investment, and to make the picture a bit broader on the sustainability of the internet model. So parts of the discussion on net neutrality really focuses on some parts, but overall we should have a look at the whole internet value chain, at all the companies along this chain, and then think for ourselves who is dominant in which part of this value chain. What we need for innovation is our intelligent networks to develop new services. So we are always just talking about these services we have. I see a lot of, or we as Deutsche Telekom see a lot of opportunities for new services in a similar way as a colleague just from as mentioned. So, for example, for gaming or whatsoever, we may have specific willingness to pay for specific quality. And if I just mention some of these services around, may it be cloud computing, may it be something like e-health, e-government, and all these kind of services, we have to look at specific network or at the networks not only from the speed, from the point of speed and broadband capacity, but really from the point of stability, reliability, security, all these issues which are today, at least predominantly, not existing in the internet. So just to make it very provocative, nobody of us will see best effort e-health. It may not be very helpful if it doesn't function very stable. What we as Deutsche Telekom see is, as I just mentioned, the possibility for new services, and we have publicly announced our strategy already in March this year. And Deutsche Telekom itself we position ourselves as an enabler for the internet economy. So it is a key goal of our strategy not to have a discussion telecom companies against internet players, but key is what enabling facilities do we have as telecommunication players which is helpful for internet players. And the idea behind it is to jointly develop new business models and then to develop new service classes which add a new value to the customer, and in adding new value to the customer there is a willingness to pay for it. So from our perspective, key elements are really transparency to enable choice, and we assume an informed customer is able to make a choice. And one last point I really want to highlight is in the discussions that the current best effort we see is here to stay. Because very often the discussions you have the feeling that somebody thinks that the bad telecommunication companies would like to change the existing internet. As I just said, the intention is to add something additionally to the existing internet. So my feeling is the debate should not focus on the discussion whether network management should be allowed or not, but on the question how should network management look like to gain the most value for the customers.
Thank you very much. Last, I want to introduce Markus Reinisch from Vodafone, as well network carrier. Since September 2010, Markus is in charge of regulation and conversions at Vodafone in Germany. Before that, Markus was heading the fixed regulatory function at Vodafone Group, where he was responsible for defining Vodafone's overall fixed regulatory strategy and the regulatory environment for the next generation access. Prior to working at Vodafone, Markus was the director regulatory development at Colt Group, and before that he had roles at Orange Group and Deloitte Consulting. Markus holds an LLM from Warwick University and a Master Law from Vienna University. Now we are curious about your perspective.
So, thanks for the kind introduction. The net neutrality debate, as some of you might know, is not an abstract theory for Vodafone. We are one of the first companies, at least in Europe, that have actually introduced service bundles, quality bundles, which differentiate for our customers in the mobile space for different service levels. So what we are talking about here is something that we have addressed already and are going to address in many of other European markets as well. And what I'd like to do is therefore to, in this context, lay out our views on how policymakers in Europe and specifically in Germany should approach this net neutrality debate. And I would also like to present, I think originally we call it the middle way between the two extreme positions that we have on net neutrality. But over time, and as we're giving presentations on this subject, I think it's becoming more of a mainstream view of at least a number of policymakers who have seriously considered this issue. So what I want to do before I'm going to the solution part, I'd like to look into the stakeholders of the net neutrality debate. And there are obviously two sides, and they have been addressed in a way it is. On the one side is the user, the consumer, and which rights of these consumers are impacted by this net neutrality debate. And the second part is obviously the firm rights, the commercial entities that act in the internet value chain. We're staying with the consumer side, the user right. So what is the user right? And this is obviously very important to determine when we talk about net neutrality. So on a very, very simple level, a user right is that every user on the internet can do what they want to do on the internet, and that's more from the content side. And the consumers of the internet can decide where they want to go on the internet. And the principle here is that you should not be restricted neither by private companies and also by governments in that matter to apply and fulfill these rights. So this is on a very, very simple level how you could define a user right. I personally believe that there's another very important element, and that is the choice of the consumer. And we have been talking, we've heard from one that the consumer is sometimes ignored in this debate. It's the choice of the consumer which is what counts here. And what we believe and what I believe is that we need to find measures to expand the choice of consumers. And that is just another way of saying that it's the consumer who is in the best position to allocate or make a decision of how network resources should and can be allocated. Or another way to put it is actually the market should not be prevented from finding these measures and finding ways to expand consumer choice. And I think there's one area where these principles that I'm outlining now have been actually very well summarized, and that's the user right charter of the FCC, which was defined in 2005. And I think it still holds true today. And the first one is that every consumer should have access to any form of lawful content, that every user can download and run applications, any applications on the internet, that he can connect any form of devices on the internet, and final, very important point is that each of the consumers should benefit from competition. And this is where really everything comes together, that we have to allow the competitive forces to decide how we can expand user choices. And I think there are plenty of examples out there that competition is working. I don't know who of you is following currently the debate of the BBC and the BBC iPlayer in the UK, where the position and the value of BBC in the British society is strong enough to apply a lot of pressure on the operators and on the network access providers to provide a transparent internet. One other example is something that we have experienced in the forefront, is that you cannot create walled gardens on the internet. And I think we've tried many years back, and our customers have deserted us because the richness of the non-proprietary network is just too strong that we could not keep customers in a walled garden anymore. So competition is working, and there are ample examples for that. But if competition is working, that also means that customers can get what they want and also can pay for what they want. And I want to give you one example, and we have very recently presented our numbers, the first half numbers of Vodafone Group, and there was one statistic in there is what the data usage of our mobile customers, data customers is. And the numbers are that 6% of our customers are currently utilizing 56% of the entire network capacity. And if you flipped it around, it's about, I just have the numbers here, it's about 17% of the network capacity is used by 75% of our customers. So that clearly shows that there's a large group of people who are subsidizing other customers who have a much stronger demand on our network capacity. And for that reason, that's why we decided to introduce new data tariffs who give a discount for customers who don't want to use certain features of the mobile broadband internet. So that is a way how we reflect the customer choices and the customer needs in giving different products to different customers. So that's the consumer side, and why we want to expand the choice of the consumer. The second side, away from the user rights, is the firm right, and is the relationship between a network operator and other members of the value chain. And here there are certain demands from regulators to say there should be no charges for data access of the content provider side of the internet. And all the charges for access can only be recovered from the end user. And this is mainly to protect or from preventing the introduction of a Google tax. Well, I question myself, how could that be a Google tax when this is a complementary service for a higher value of a higher quality that is optional for any operator to choose and to use. So the whole argument of taxing somebody, taxing means not having an option, falls away. But we've also heard before, and we've also heard in the presentation just from Professor Valetti about the two-sided markets. I mean, this is, preventing an access provider from participating in a two-sided market is not opportune if all the other members of the internet value chain do operate in a two-sided market, which is quite apparent. And I think there was a debate about the small guy. I missed it, unfortunately, but I only had a reference to this. And I think if there's an argument about putting restrictions through a tiered price model on somebody, I think that is probably one of the most convincing argument that you might prevent competition and innovation from the small guys in the garage. And I think to a certain extent that is probably true, that the free internet would enable this. But on the other side, this is not reflective of the realities of economy. And if you are the small guy in the garage, you also have to pay for moving up on the ranks on the Google search site. So you also have to pay for caching your content locally on a distribution network if you want to do this. So economies of scale and financial resources are always a criteria for entering a market. And I want to finish now with the middle way of how we can bridge these interests of both sides and of the advocates of the net neutrality debate. And what we're proposing, and this is obviously not a new thing, but the first thing is that we believe that we have to safeguard and protect the internet, the unmanaged internet as it's called. I think we all know that the internet is not unmanaged, it is managed already, but let's put it that the internet that we know today needs to be protected, that there has to be a best effort level, and that best effort level has to be at least as good as we have today, if not better. And I see a role for a regulator to come in here, if necessary, if competition will not define what this best effort level is, to come in and form certain standards. So that is number one pre-requirement. And only when this pre-requirement is met, then operators and access providers should be permitted to offer separated service, differentiated services, and charge differentiated prices. And that can be done either to the customer and to the content providers. There's a third principle to this, which is that there has to be non-discrimination between customers, but also between other members of the value chain. And if I mean non-discrimination, that means that I cannot have a special deal with a specific content provider, or even a special deal with my downstream arm that provides content. And then lastly, and that has been mentioned many times, transparency, transparency, transparency. The customer needs to know what he gets. If there's network management, then it has to be fully transparent. And when all these four criteria are met, then I think we have the chance for vibrant internet, and we have a chance to maximize the choice for the customer and to retain the levels of innovation and the possibilities of innovation that we have today.
Thank you very much. Yeah, maybe the first and the last statement go pretty much in the direction of a minimum standard on one hand, and they really request some kind of authority or regulation at least. So do you really think we need more power for our authority, meaning the Bundesnetzagentur, like FCC, or FCC is not really a legislation, but do you think we need something like that in Germany right now, and to do it in advance?
Well, if I listen to those two gentlemen, I probably think, yes, we do need it in the future. No, certainly not now, but I can clearly see a picture here, what we might experience in the future, where we might have, where there is then the necessity for a regulator to step in. But I really have a question here, because you said that you'd agree with the 6 principles of the FCC, and one principle is that an ISP should allow user to send and receive all lawful content. So you argue strongly with the wish and the consumer of the consumer, so he has to have the choice of services. But imagine there is a new gaming application, gaming service. And this new gaming service, which is let's say it's the killer application, but this application doesn't have too much money. This new application, this new service, wants to reach the consumer, but isn't willing to pay for your extra service, for your better service, what you offer. So the better service layer. How is the consumer then able to access this service and use the service, which need lots of bandwidth, if this service provider is not willing to pay you for that? Because access certainly does not mean just to have access, but it's also, and that's how I understand the FCC, it's also the possibility to use the service.
I think I hope I understood your question correctly, because I think there's a fairly straightforward answer to this. If I have a tiered pricing approach for my customers, and my customer values that service sufficiently, then my assumption is that the customer will choose a tiered package, which supports the quality of service that is required for that specific service.
But it's only the one side of the coin. You also want to charge the service provider.
I think I said, a bit awkwardly, it's the and or that is in there. I think there should be the possibility for an access provider to charge both sides. So that is the clear intention, but there also will be the opportunity to have a bundle which is clearly looking at the consumer side and is charging the consumer.
Again, my question: if the service provider is not willing to pay, how can you offer this very consumer this service?
No, I think as I said, you can choose in it. If this is a service that is attractive enough to generate enough revenues, then I can clearly foresee that can be, in that sense, a one-sided market, where the consumer is covering the cost for the service provision and for the higher quality.
So the consumer is bearing it all?
If he values that service sufficiently, then that's clearly an option for the consumer.
I guess Wolf has some comment to that.
Yeah, you mentioned the concept of the two-sided market, and to me as a non-economist, I dare to say it seems a little bit we try to create this two-sided market now, because we have the situation that the whole internet is nowadays already between the end user and the content provider. But it's not that there's one person offering the service. At the moment there's the user having a contractual relationship and paying for it with its access provider, and on the other side there's the content provider with some other services who is hosting service and certainly paying also for his access to the internet, but not to the one access provider. And what you now try to do is, as the end user's access provider, to put yourself between the user and the content he wants to use, he wants to access, which means that now you put yourself into the position of a two-sided market. You create it just by that new pricing model with all the problems that come with a two-sided market. And that, I think, is the big problem, especially as you say, it's not a taxing, because as long as you have an option, you can choose, it's not taxing, but there's a strong incentive for the network operator to limit and reduce the quality of the best effort channel, to ensure that there's a strong incentive for content providers to go into the premium class, because you can then earn more money. What to do against that? So that is why at least there needs to be some minimum quality requirements to prevent that to happen. And if we speak about consumer choice, what you did, I think the more competition there is, the more choice there is. And as I explained before, whenever you introduce an additional pricing and create this two-sided market situation, we will see a distortion of competition, which means lesser choice. So in the end, and last thing is, we can't look at this only economically on the question of whether it's like competition for the money of the end user, but we also have to think about competition for attention in the internet. So there is a strong value in the internet that you will encounter things you wouldn't have seen if you have just like your daily newspaper coming to your house. But now it's just a step away, another opinion of some small guy who hadn't the chance before to get this to the broader public. Now you have it. And that is something that is, so where Professor Holznagel, I'm sure, is with me, that is an additional value of the internet that can't be measured probably in economic terms, but need to be taken into account.
Just one remark from my side to what you've said on the two-sided market. I think it's an interesting idea that operators can create the two-sided market. Either it is a two-sided market or it is not. And it was a two-sided market already, but there was a deliberate decision to just charge one side of the market. So what we've just heard, I think it was Tommaso who presented it, if you maximize the value of the overall platform, it is definitely worth considering on whether a change in payments from both sides will overall increase the value of the platform. And of course, this is value which in the end benefits the customer and enables new business models. As I said, we are as Telecom in the process negotiating with various internet players on different business models, and there is a big interest in developing new business models. So there is, of course, a willingness to pay from both sides, because both operators can gain from it to the benefit of the customer, who gets more choice and more different services.
Yeah, maybe we come shortly back to the minimum quality standard, which was mentioned again here. Do you think, or where is this minimum standard come from? Do you think it's an authority who has to state that, and or is this a negotiation process between the industry guys?
So I think what I said, and I said it again, is I don't think it's necessarily an authority that has to specify the standard. I think that a competitive market will define a minimum standard. However, should that market not function for whatever reason, I think there's a scope for a regulator to come in and set those standards. And I think that is the scope for the regulator, the main scope for him to intervene here in this debate.
Just to add, we do have it. That's what I said. The difference between United States and Europe. We do have a provision in the current EU framework. So there is a possibility, as you said, for the regulator at a later stage to step in. So it is not something in the air, but it's practically implemented, and we will see how the market develops. But the important point is that normally the markets develop better under competitive circumstances, especially in an environment which is so highly changeable and innovative as the internet. So to make a static rule have to be deliberate very carefully.
Okay, thank you. And maybe another question to your statement about the more user-centric perspective. So you mentioned that it is important to offer really the service levels, what the people are ready for to pay. And so my question is, how is this to realize then between all the different parties involved in the really transport area and the access providers? So is there a kind of roaming which guarantees the certain level I buy with 1&1, let's say? And can you guarantee that over all providers who are involved until I get my service? Is there finally something like the airline alliances where I'm a member with? Or how can I think about that? What is the idea?
Well, exactly. That's not existing, and not yet, but I doubt it will ever happen. So perhaps the ITU wants to. The ITU certainly wants to step in here and take over the regime of the internet, but doubtful we should allow it that. But I think there's no need for that, because as I described earlier, the true congestion problems we encounter are very close to the end user in the access networks. It's not an issue of the backbone or the peering knots or other things. So therefore, it's absolutely sufficient if the access provider can prioritize in its own network, or if he uses another service provider, at least he can solve that in a contractual agreement with its service provider to ensure that specific content is prioritized according to the need and wishes of the user. So that is technologically possible, and it's much easier to implement than to ensure what you describe, a quality guarantee across the whole internet, which in its current architecture wouldn't be possible. It's only possible if, as I said, we really do a step back to a very strong tier 1 players who have to transport all content, while it wouldn't be probably doable in the current peering world. So that's why I'm so doubtful about the introduction of such an interconnection regime, what it is in the end, compared to that model where only the access part is optimized.
Just a comment from my side, because I disagree to what you said, that you don't see an opportunity or interest on the customer side for these kind of quality guarantees, end-to-end quality guarantees. I, to be honest, do see a customer interest in using these services and using it across networks. So there is a very simple incentive for the companies to develop interconnection. I agree that it has not existed yet, but there is an incentive for the companies to do so. If we just look, for example, in the development regarding cloud computing, so that you leave all your data somewhere in the cloud internet and you can access it from everywhere you are. So of course, a very big interest for every customer is to be sure that this is securely and stable, this connection, and he may travel from United States to Germany and whatsoever, so he has an interest in this kind of solutions. And today these kind of solutions do partially exist for business customers. So why shouldn't we as operators all together develop a similar scheme for the end customer? I'm sure there is a willingness to pay and an interest on the customer side.
Yeah, I also, I'm not so sure if the bottleneck is only the access line. I think if we talk about consumer choice, we're not just talking about capacity and megabits and speed. I think it is quality, and the quality sits somewhere else in the network. And that is, I'm unfortunately burdened with a legal background as well, so I'm not going into too much detail here, but the quality of service and the differentiation possibilities that are worth investing and are very expensive to invest are not just in the access bit. And I think if you want to drive innovation in that area, then you have to give those investors an incentive to invest there. And it's everywhere in the network and not just the access.
It certainly is everywhere in the network where you need to invest if you want to introduce the scheme. But the capacity problem is only at some point. And the question is whether we want to invest indeed in all these technologies. It's not just
a capacity debate. That's what I'm saying. It's a quality debate.
Exactly.
Okay. On that point, I would like to open the discussion to the audience. So I will be happy to get your questions here. Yeah. Can we have the microphone, please? This person there.
I think this question is more addressed to the eBay representative. Let me elaborate. You finished your speech by saying that you prefer regulation management by regulators than management by the market. The question is, eBay, as far as I know, is quite successful. It's quite successful because eBay has addressed rightly some needs of the customers. Why do you think it could be better for eBay to have the government managing the network instead of operators that want to address the same thing that eBay is doing? The user requirement. Once you let the government there, for example, why not prioritize German movies? For example, once you have the political criteria for managing the network instead of the market, eBay is no longer relying on its capacities in order to survive. It's relying on political decision. So why are you so keen of having the government decide your future instead of the networks management?
I do agree that actually eBay could be very, very relaxed, and because we will probably be able to pay the extra fee, we will probably be able to pay for the extra service. We are a big player, and this new world will probably will lead to a situation where all the big players remain big players, and new players will because there's a higher entry barrier, will have it's harder for them to enter the market. However, we are part of the internet, and we want e-commerce to grow, but we also want the internet to grow. And one very important thing about this is that new services occur, and that the internet remains attractive and increases its attractivity. And we believe that this is only possible in a world where there is some neutrality, some sort of. And as I said, we are not opposing network management, but we want to have clear rules for that. And these rules should be rather established by some elected officials than by some companies, and be different from company to company. So, I mean, there's also a possibility to come up with some self-regulation where all access providers come up and say, well, this is sound, this is good, properly network management. We all want to stick to this and have a transparent way of coming up with these rules. Fine, but as long as every access provider comes up with some network management which is not transparent and which has like 100 different service classes, I think it's not transparent anymore.
I just would like to make a remark on the point you raised surrounding the innovation and the willingness to pay on the side of big players. eBay is a big player, Google is a big player. What does really happen in the internet? Someone like Google is investing themselves in network structure, and they are not independent of telcos, but more and more become independent from the network from others. So the big players have the cash to pay for it. If you take a company like Akamai, who's doing some kind of quality of service by another type of business model, they work together with big companies, not with a small innovative garage firm. And this is exactly the chance in the model of network management, and to implement in the networks the steering capacities for security, reliability, and so on, because then every small garage firm have at least the chance to cooperate and build a business model without taking a huge amount of money investing on the infrastructure themselves.
I'm sort of a charity model.
Yeah, we're just laughing because you turn out to be a socialist. You want to pay that the expenses the rich guys pay so that
what I said, we cooperate. Of course, we earn money by it, but we cooperate with small players. We do not need net management capacities to work together with Google. Google can do it on its own. We needed to do it with the various small firms to implement it. That's the difference.
But you make the choice.
Yeah.
With whom?
Not the consumer anymore.
We offer it non-discriminately for everyone. So that's not a question.
The internet was and is innovative, and we didn't need the Deutsche Telekom for the internet to be innovative. And now you say we want to create new services and new innovation. I'm just wondering if not the internet like we have it now is creative enough and producing
new services today don't rely only on capacity. That's what he said. It's a quality game, it's not a capacity game, and therefore we have to change or to implement technical things in the network.
I think it's quite a tall order to call that socialism. I think the internet works, I agree, but to keep the internet working for the demands of the future, you have to invest money. And I think it's socialism to say there should be elected officials who tell us investors on how we invest or how we treat our investments. I mean, yes, to a certain extent that is true. If there's a market failure, then yes, they should come in and they should regulate us. But, we are not talking about a free network here. I mean, this has to be invested, and if we want to offer the services for our customers, and again, it's a customer discussion that we have here, then that money has to come from somewhere. And funny enough, that's us who has to spend the money into that network. So it's not, it's not socialism to say we want to offer our customers, small and large, the service they want, and we pay for it and to invest in it, and you please pay for it to use it. I think it's a very straightforward business principle.
But you mentioned before as well that we should protect the internet as it is now, right? Absolutely. So that was your first principle. Okay, Mr. Knies, you have a question.
One point I think is also helpful to look at other networks. It is always also helpful to look at other network industries when thinking about allocation of network capacities. And it is, of course, the situation that those who are investing have also to have the competency to make the investment decisions, because you also have to take into account the financial responsibilities. But then my question is, if one really likes to introduce this focusing on the quality of service, one likes to introduce quality of service differentiation, then one has to think about network architectures which deviate from the TCP protocol. Because there is a conflict in it. When you give the high priority data packets, they cannot be slowed down by the TCP protocol. That is a conflict in itself. So there is some kind of change. And in the morning, and we have during the whole day, there was sometimes always often the argument, not by the economists, but more maybe by the engineers or Wirtschaftsinformatik, etc. Is it not so complicated? It has not so high transaction cost to implement this new architectures. And we know there is this stiff search architecture. There are architectures we know. First question: what is your estimation? How do you evaluate, or how do you estimate the transaction cost of implementation? This quality of service differentiation on one hand for your own network, but also more important also for interconnection or peering transit agreements. Until now, as far as I see it, the service level agreements are still on average quality, focuses on average quality. And what is the development to introduce this quality of service differentiation so that, let's say, the high priority package are not stopped at the borderline of your network?
Well, I'll start with a very feeble answer that I probably can't answer the question about the protocol. So again, I'm not sure if anybody here on the panel would be in the ability to do this. But again, with my very limited technical knowledge, I really would like that we get the debate away from capacity and also necessarily capacity prioritization. If you, for example, take my example about caching content closer to the customer, there's a cost that will exist for the network provider, for example, to bring a distributed network closer to the customer. These are costs which, you know, they exist, and they have to be obviously shared with the people who value the service. I can't unfortunately make a more informed statement about changing protocols and doing this, and I assume there will be cost involved, but I also assume that those costs of optimizing a network will be in line with the benefits that will be created for the society, for the customer, and for overall welfare. So sorry for not being more specific on that.
I can add some words on the interconnection issue you raised. So, of course, in the end, it would be the best if it is not only within one network, but across networks. And as you rightly mentioned, it is not available now. But standardization on these issues is ongoing. So there are negotiations among operators, and especially if I take one example from the GSM Association, so the Mobile World Association, they started already, I think it's 4 or 5 years ago, started in developing an interconnection model, which is developing some kind, let's say, a hub and spoke system, so that not every carrier has to interconnect with everyone, but to have some single point of interconnection and then to go in the other networks. So a lot of technicians are working on this for some years, and this is not only, it started in the mobile arena, but several fixed net players enter this standardization forum. So there is a lot of work ongoing, and of course it's not finished yet, but it's an important point and it's worked on.
I just want to really come with another question here, because I still perhaps just have not got the distinction you make between capacity issues, solving capacity issues, and quality. So what causes quality issues you want to solve? So usually in an IP environment, we deal with packet loss, we deal with delay, we deal with jitter. All of them occur, according to my limited knowledge, and perhaps there are some people in the room that could explain it to me, these are all, they occur if there's a capacity issue. So the quality is immediately depending on capacity. In the ideal network of absolute, always sufficient capacity, everything goes through in light speed and So what additional quality elements you need in the network, which would be an interesting like contribution to the debate to understand how we can solve these while assuring that no adverse effects on competition have to be feared.
Well, if I go first on this, I think a good example for this is if we just look slightly outside of this industry that we're talking about now, which is the end consumer, the retail market. As you might have heard, in my prior life, I've worked for a company called Deutsche Telekom, which is a pan-European fiber network provider. And if there would be nothing else than what you've mentioned in terms of quality differentiation, these kind of companies would not exist. There's obviously much, much more in abilities to manage a network, and people and customers are paying a lot of money for that. And that starts from the intelligence of the core network, of quality service levels and so on. I mean, there's much, much more that you can imagine of how such a business works. And as I said, if you would not have these differentiation possibilities, these business models wouldn't work. And there would be a lot of customers out there that you rely on, we rely on every day, which wouldn't have the basis for providing the services. And I remember when, this net neutrality debate came up many, many years ago, and we were confronted with that at court the first time, and we just didn't understand what to do with this, because that was obviously demanding something that would have destroyed that kind of business, and that's a very big business, and not just in Europe but also beyond Europe. And there is a big market for differentiation at the quality level, and that goes beyond bits and bytes and prioritization and size of pipes and jitter and so on.
Can we make it a little bit more concrete? What is the benefit for the user he should be willing to pay for? Apart from these things that have a connection to capacity, an end user, normal end user, because I accept that for companies there might be some special interest things, but for normal end user, let's make it concrete. I think that's...
You can make it very concrete, because the parameters you named are not only dependent on the bandwidth. Even you will have packet loss in a network, even if you have high bandwidth, because you cannot ensure currently that on the network worldwide you always have sufficient capacity. It doesn't work, and you cannot manage the network worldwide because it's separated operators. And if you want to have a stability and security issues, as I said, for cloud computing, it's completely different. So there is really a lot more issues around quality than simple bandwidth.
Certainly not bandwidth, no, that wasn't what I said, but capacity. Capacity is certainly influenced by routing issues, by and so on. But
maybe one last comment on that issue?
Then you have jitter-sensitive applications like voice over IP or like interactive video game. The average capacity doesn't help you. What really helps you is that you have the guarantee that the packets are really cheap, are not having a certain kind of jitter. And so I think that is an additional important element, that not only the average capacity is counting, but also, let's say, the variance of delay, which is jitter then. And as more and more applications are jitter sensitive, it is becoming more and more important. This quality is.
Yep. But if you have enough capacity, then you don't have jitter. That's the point.
Not the average. Necessary, but not sufficient. So capacity is an issue, always an issue, but additional quality parameters are an additional issue.
Okay. Last short, someone? No? So is there another question? Yeah.
So there's one question I would like to ask Mr. Reinisch. You mentioned that you would block some features of your service for end users, and if they pay an additional fee, they would get them, in addition. So what are the criteria you use to distinguish between the features that are in the basic service and the ones that are in the let me say, additional service?
Right. First, I think that's more of a theoretical concept. So it's not necessarily just blocking of features, but if you look at data tariffs, I give you the example of Vodafone Spain, which is the first country that introduced that differentiated data tariff. That would be, in that sense, capacity-based. that, I've mentioned the numbers before, how many people use how much of the capacity of the network, that if you decide that you actually have, for example, a lower data usage, then you pay less than somebody who has a higher data usage. So whatever, 250 megabit package per month is cheaper than so that in that specific case. So, I think we try to get away from the capacity. I know that you're coming back again and said this is a capacity, but it's early days. So this is one form of differentiation. So you choose that you have less capabilities in that. I can foresee that if you choose not to do peer-to-peer traffic on your network, that you have, and this goes now away from just pure capacity, I could assume that you have a specific tariff that excludes peer-to-peer traffic, which is cheaper than a tariff that allows peer-to-peer traffic. I can foresee different tariffs for high-definition television, for example. And if you say, I'm not actually really that much into high-definition television, all I do is emailing and other things, then I think it would be unfair for all the customers to pay for that high level of service if they couldn't have a discount for a lower quality grade of service.
Everybody, so
don't disagree.
One comment. Indra, do you have a question?
I've got a question. Some of you have mentioned transparency. Some of you have mentioned transparency as one of the ideal criteria how to regulate a deviation from the best effort. And I'm wondering how transparency can work if, first of all, it's not quite clear which services are regulated how by which companies. So you have different access providers and you're supposed to choose between the type of service that they offer to you. And then you're supposed to read into their contractual design, which is already 3 pages long. We have that problem already. Additional clauses on what services are included or not. So unless all of the content providers, all of the service providers would agree on offering the same type of classes. And there I'm with, I think it was Tim Brennan who said, or Tomasa who said that he has some kind of an ungood feeling if there are people sitting on a table agreeing on the clauses in a monopolistic structure, basically, in order to ensure competition. So I really wonder how transparency could become the decisive criteria. From all that I know, when we're talking about information as the ruling tool on making decision, it always has to be the core principle of the yes or no. And I'm not really sure whether this will work in the sense that we have a price differentiation here of different services. Because for me, actually, as an end user, the first thing is how much of a trouble do I have to change the service, the access, basically. And if that has worked fine so far, I have very strong incentives, sunk cost and everything to stick to that particular provider. So transparency to me seems to be an important issue. I completely agree, but whether it can solve the problem as much as you claim, uncertain.
Shall I start? Good. I think you sort of, if I understood it correctly, you also answered to a certain degree the question that on the one side, there will be transparency if every operator sets his own quality of service classes and always sets his own best effort classes, for example. And then on the other side, we have this very uncomfortable feeling of people coming together and just having one quality of service or the same tiers, for example. I think that is an issue. We have to find somewhere a middle way, and as soon as you give operators the opportunity to differentiate themselves from others, which I think is why we have this uncomfortable feeling that we all have one class, you will create, inevitably some form of intransparency between the operators. But we should also concentrate on the transparency if you're the customer of one operator. And, I can't say too much about this, but we're thinking very seriously about this internally, about how to create this transparency, how a customer can see immediately on his screen if his service is tampered with or not, for example, to what extent and so on. So I think we know this, that transparency is such an important issue, that we take it very seriously, because otherwise, you have these issues of net neutrality. And then the most important point is, what are you doing about it? And that means migration. Can you migrate away from your operator? And we had this debate before we actually came out here, and I said, that's the two things you need, is transparency. And I would be happy with very good transparency when you're the customer of your provider and it's transparent what your service provider provides you. Ideally, you have transparency, very good transparency across the providers. But the second step is then the possibility to migrate. Both of that is not very easy, but we understand that this is the key to the net neutrality debate.
Well, to say that I can agree to what you've just said on the transparency issue. I just would like to add in the context that in the EU framework, a lot of, especially what you just raised, transparency rules are included. So in the end, if the market doesn't himself react in a most transparent way and it didn't work, it is part of the possibility for the regulatory authorities to make mandatory prescriptions on how to ensure transparency. So there are a legal possibility as well. And if I just look at other examples for other services, there is very often, or mostly, you have even private companies who set up a business in comparing tariffs. If you look at Germany, Teltarif as one example, what they like to do is to compare different tariffs. So there is an interest for others really to make it transparent and to support the companies in making it transparent. So I personally see it as a competitive process, but in the end there is a legal possibility for the authority to intervene.
Just a statement from the right.
Yeah, I mean, I can agree that transparency is a very important step, maybe the first step, but I also agree with your statement that it's in the moment rather tough for a consumer to switch, and that there's not only switching costs, like money-based switching costs, but also like time, and all people are afraid of technical things, so they are really happy if the internet connection is up and running, and they don't want to touch this. That's probably what you meant. So I think that that's, plus we talking here about the European context, and I'm pretty sure that not all 500 million European users can switch from or choose from 4 up to 5 different access providers.
Yeah, that's it. Many of them probably have no choice at all, and others are probably bound to 2 years contracts. And so one thing is, how do you want to change ever your form of network management? Because you would need to inform your customers about changing your service, and from a legal background, this should come with a specific justification to terminate the contract from the side of the user if he does not agree to this change of your service you provide for, different to what he has originally agreed to. So that is something that probably, and that lacks in the EU telco package, for example, a specific right of the user to terminate the contract once the service is changed in the way through network management.
Well, this is already part of, at least in Germany, part of the normal law for terms and conditions. If you change substantially the contract, you have a specific right to end the contract.
The question is where substantial change begins. So
this is the user wants to discuss. This is the most interesting part for lawyers to discuss about the contract.
There are enough lawyers around. That's a nice saying by Bob Schwartz to this issue, but it comes more from the financial area, who said efficiency is made by transparency, money is made by intransparency. So
and
I guess we know that a little bit from insurance industry as well. Yeah, is there another important question so far? Yeah.
Maybe one last one. So you just said that it's important as well for the customer that it's transparent, but obviously if you guarantee prioritization for some of the customers, some other ones will realize that they will get discriminated with less quality. So what do you think the customers will do? And you mentioned before that you want to assure the same level of quality in a best effort level. So do you think there will be additional investment into infrastructure, or how do you want to assure the best effort level?
Okay, the first one, as I said, there have to be measures to make it transparent to customers if they're degraded, for example, if the quality is degraded, and if they're in a certain package where that happens. And how it's done, I think bear with us. And I want to add to something that Mr. Krancke said is that you know, it's in our interest to be transparent, because there are private organizations out there that make it very, very transparent. And to the ones who don't know the example I alluded to, the BBC has threatened yesterday to clearly name and shame all the ISPs in the UK that do network management. So I think, you know, an organization like the BBC, if they do that, that means something. You know, ISPs take that very seriously. Sorry?
That's the state. The BBC is the state.
Well, if you ask the BBC, they would think differently about this, but it's
you just should be clear what you are talking about.
Well,
you are saying it's fine with this iPlayer with the BBC. I think too. But what you are talking about is that it is not the market. It's not a private institution. It's a state institution that starts to secure net neutrality.
I would disagree with this. I mean, I have lived in the UK for a long time, but I'm not an expert in all details. But the BBC is not. It's a private corporation which has the board of trustees of the BBC, which are not necessarily the state, and the state is in. If it would be the state, I think the BBC would say very different things than it does. It's I think really besides the point if the BBC is part of the state or not. If it's not the BBC, it is somebody else. And it's Hulu or, you know, whatever it is, whatever service it is, a private company that is affected by the management of the network. There's another company, if you want to know, it's called Sam Knows, which is another UK organization which is not related to the state in any formal way. And they do exactly the same thing. They do measure the quality of the services. So I'm just saying, coming back to answer the first question, so the transparency, we have to figure it out, and we don't have to figure it out because we know this is so important for the net neutrality debate. We have to figure it out because we are under commercial pressure to be transparent about this. And now I forgot the second part of your question. Sorry.
It's like, you know, if it's transparent, like what you.
Yes. So if
what you like,
so what your question is, do you then invest in the best effort that it's? I think it's a misunderstanding of what best effort means today. So best effort today is not that you have a guaranteed quality of service today. So I think that efficiency of networks and efficiency of equipment will, in my eyes, lead that the best effort that we would see today, so if we would cement it in what it is today, would probably progress and improve over time. Yeah? But I would not foresee a world where best effort means guaranteed quality of services for everybody. Because that's exactly the other thing that you know, we have to invest very heavily in order to provide that to our customers who pay for that. Sorry.
That's another question.
Now another provocative question. You see, what I learned from your statements is that the internet will completely fall apart because there is nothing that combines a common platform of communication. You will have, if your world come through, you will have, let's say, hundreds of classes of quality of services. And then just the question was very clear. Is there anything like best effort? Yeah, nobody can define it. In this regard, the internet as an open platform for discussion and innovation will fall apart. Conceptually, there is just not one argument from your side how you could secure this. There is only, you see, it can happen that the public will do an outcry. We have it in Germany, for example, with Google Street View, that it was basically a Ministry for Consumer Protection who made a public, opened up a public debate that Google should give a specific right in this Google Street View business. I think the consumers got more rights than they would ever have gotten if a political party would have wanted to get a statute through. What I am trying to say is, okay, it may be that politics change in the era of internet in a way that the state is not capable to get statute through, but that the consumers, and that we will have constant consumer movements that force business to a sort of self-regulation, or to that the public bargains, like in this Google area with Google, to get more rights. That could be a perspective of the future, but does it really make sense? I think the transaction costs to have constant fights with the public and private businesses, telecom companies, that is also extremely costly. So the political costs for this strategy is extremely high. In this regard, I'm convinced after this debate that some basic rules are needed. You might call them minimum standards of services, you might call them universal service, or you might call them must-carry rules. It doesn't matter to me. What is necessary is an instrument that secures public communication for public debate and innovation.
I keep that very short, my answer. I think I actually addressed this already. So I do believe that the competition, the competitive market, will create a best effort service which is attractive for customers. However, and I think I've made this very clear as well, however, if that is not the case, then there is a role for the regulator to come in here and to specify what this best effort has to be. And I think we are willing, despite the high investment I have to make, to submit ourselves to a decision by a regulator, by a government, to make very clear what they expect, what you called it, must carry, universal service, or whatever it is, what that needs to be. And if the market doesn't sort it out, then yes, I think there's no choice. And I'm with you actually on this one. And I would be more than happy to accept the principle, because it is necessary that the customer can know that a certain quality of service is maintained in the future as well.
Just to clarify, because you said the internet is falling apart at hundreds of different quality classes. To be realistic, and I think the technological colleagues sitting in the room can support this, in the end you will never have hundreds of different classes. In the end you get clustering, and we had a lot of discussions internally within our company how many classes are manageable at all, and in the end you come up with something like 3, 4, 5 classes of different quality classes, and completely different service may have the same technological needs. If you take, for example, gaming and a video conference, so the technological needs are pretty similar. They have to do the picture and not be interrupted and so on. From the technological side, maybe the same, but from the customer side, completely different service.
Okay, are there other important questions? So, further? So since this is not the case, maybe I can ask you for a final statement. I start on the right side. What do you think is the internet looking like in 3 to 5 years maybe? And what are you expecting as the next topic for our conference here in 2 years?
So I hope that the internet more or less remains the same, so that also in the future I can invent and come up with a killer application without having to pay the extra access provider for it. So probably in 3 or 4 years we have to discuss how can we make money as an access provider instead of receiving money from the service provider.
Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, I also tend to believe that there won't be that much change to the internet, just because it is indeed economically and technologically so challenging to realize what was discussed today. But as you imagine, I wouldn't be too sad about such a development. What I hope that we won't discuss in 2 years' time or 3 years' time or 5 years' time is how to reinstall competition in the telecommunication market in Germany, because we have again just one dominant player, which is one risk I see. And I also hope that we won't discuss how the state can foster innovation in the internet, because so far it did it very well without that.
I do hope that the internet will further develop over time to develop the new services the customer wishes to use. We have all the interesting services in front of the door, and the network should be capable of dealing with it, especially not only for the big internet players but for small firms, and therefore changes in the network are needed.
Probably hope for the same, a clear improvement of the qualities available for customers on the internet. I think that in, 3 to 5 years' time, I don't know what the time frame was, I think we will look back to this and think that was probably what it was, a debate, a discussion about net neutrality. I think we still will have failed to find real reasons where there was discrimination, or at least where discrimination could have been maintained by anybody operating in a competitive market. And what do I think we talk about? Well, maybe if Herr Osthaus is right, then we talk about the quality differentiators on the internet and not quantity differentiators.
Okay, thank you very much to the panelists for this nice final statement and the whole discussion. Thank you to the audience for your questions.